Hi, and welcome to the Philippians Commentary Podcast. I'm Arim,
I'm Tina.
and we're the commentary editors at the Philippian. Before we start today's episode, we want to begin by stating that our views are our views, and we have a guest today, so our guest views are our guest views, and they in no way represent the views of the board of the Philippian.
Would you like to introduce yourself, Dean Esty?
Sure. My name is Susan Sao Esty. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Dean of Students.
Yay! So today we'd love to sort of talk to you about room visitations and what they look like right now, what they might look like in the future, and sort of just unpack the why as well. So I think we can start. Arim and I can give like a little brief understanding of what we know about the room visitation system, and we are uppers, so hopefully we know what it is, and then you can kind of talk to us about what you think the reasoning and the pros and cons are.
That sounds good.
Yeah, so Arim, jump in whenever you want. My understanding is that the room visitation rules are basically set so that dorm communities remain somewhat insular and that visiting guests sort of feel some kind of like degree of separation in the sense that like they are not necessarily part of the dorm community, and to basically regulate the comfort level mostly of like everyone else in the dorm community. So it's not just like an revolving door of like people whose faces you don't recognize coming in and out of the dorm. It's stricter for underclassmen in terms of when you can have a room visit. When you have a room visit, you have to check in with the house counselor. A house counselor has to be present within the dorm, and the door has to be open 90 degrees, so all the way with the lights on.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that because Tina and I are uppers now, so when we both entered in 2020, so that was like height of COVID. So I feel like for me at least, and for some people that I know, that has kind of stunted our understanding a little bit of room visits, because that obviously was not allowed the first year and for like a good chunk of our lower year as well. But I mean, I think pretty much what I understand of it is what you said as well. And at the same time, for me, it's also that I feel a little bit lazy very often to go through the whole process and like keep all these rules. So I just like don't do room visits. So.
Yeah. That's definitely a thing with me too. And because of the timing as well. But I think it's also important to mention that we are in a stage with room visitation reform where before the pandemic, so neither of us experienced this, but room visits were gendered in the sense that anybody of the same gender could come into your dorm without like your dorm room without approval from a house counselor, but of the opposite gender would need approval, and now it's everybody needs approval.
Right, and that didn't take into account anybody who didn't identify as female or male. So any non-binary, genderqueer, anybody who identified outside of male and female were not accounted for in our written policy. Yeah. Yep.
All right. So, I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, what do you think in particular are the benefits of a system that we have, like of the system we have right now?
And did we kind of cover everything in terms of what the rules are right now?
Yeah, I think you did.
Yay.
I think, well, I hope your dorms did, right? Like you talked about room visits?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I mean,
hope so.
yes. Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Because that should be, I know there are a lot of rules and I know it's hard to keep up with the Blue Book, but I hope that you all talked about it so that everybody knew. And I hope it's posted in your dorms, like what the hours are and the process and all that. So it's easy for you all. I think, Tina, you said something really important, right? Which is that a long time ago, not only before the pandemic, but like even before then, the world was a very different place. And I say that in a lot of different ways. So not only in terms of gender inclusion, but in terms of just safety. So I think you said that at the beginning. Like it used to be that the dorms were more permeable. And in fact, there's a story that I heard that it was when and someone who is unaffiliated with Phillips Academy, who is an adult male, showed up in one of our female girls' dorm bathrooms uninvited, that we started locking our dorms and using a card swipe system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But so, like, the world has changed a lot over the years. And so there have been, even just since I've been here, which is not that long, we have had more threats even to our community, more things where people who aren't, well, you all remember earlier this year with the barbecue sauce in Commons. We have people who are entering our school spaces, which are private property, who are unaffiliated with the school. And so there are different moments, and especially with the skyrocketing increase in deliveries to campus, they're just, and I don't mean to like, I don't want to throw shade at delivery people. I really don't. But I just mean we are a much more permeable campus, and the world has changed. There have been more threats. There's more gun violence. You don't have to like look that up to know that. It just is, right?
Yeah.
We could look it up, but I know there is. So some of the changes we've made have been twofold, right? Both to increase, obviously, the like gender inclusive piece, trying to be equitable in our practices and inclusive, and then also the safety piece and trying to make sure that our dorm communities feel safe when they're in their spaces. They don't have to worry when I get to the top of the stairs and turn, is there going to be someone I don't know there? And then also just to build community, because I think when the dorm spaces were more permeable, there was a really easy way to be like, I don't need to hang out with these people because I'm going to hang out with other people. And then something would happen, like somebody drank my Gatorade. But you can always be like, well, Tina had a bunch of guests over here on the weekend. I hope, having us live more intentionally together and actually spend time together, and also keeping that space. To your point, not only about physical safety, because I jumped to like the extreme of gun violence, which I didn't mean to, but just safety. Like if I want to put on a face mask and put on like what I'm going to wear to bed and then walk down the hall to the bathroom, like I don't need to run into that person who's in my math class, right?
Yeah.
So that was part of like just trying to be intentional about what's upstairs, what's downstairs in the dorms, like, because clearly there are social spaces and social times.
Yeah. I totally understand that, and I agree with you. I live in a room that's somewhat close to the common room, so sometimes like on the weekends, like I can hear people I like am not friends with or even know the names of in the common room, and I'm sort of just like walking around in a towel trying to take a shower. But to your point about community, actually, I was thinking recently that I felt in a way, I think, more disconnected from my friends because so many people, like, I've never seen the inside of their room, which, at least when I was a student at, like, a regular day school, was something that was much more common. Like, Arim, I think I've seen your room once, and we've known each other. I mean, except for when we lived together. Since then, I've seen your dorm, like, once. And that, I wonder, is, like, how do you think that students can sort of adjust to that fact, and specifically in terms of like finding a space not to build community but to build trust with one specific other person in a private space, whether that be because you're emotionally vulnerable or just need a space to decompress, especially if you're someone who's more on the introverted side. How would you say that students should go about that?
Yeah, to your point about seeing Arim's room, like you could still do a room visit, too, right? Like that is a possibility. And in terms of emotional vulnerability, I guess it depends on your room and the layout of the dorm, right? About whether, if you have a room visit and the door is open, could you have a private conversation in there? I think that's different depending on the dorm. Right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So that's different for different students.
Right. So I'll just take myself as an example. I have a room that, like, when I open the door, it's like straight. You can see all the way through. You can see everything. And there was this one time that I was having an emotional breakdown, and I was like, I was sobbing. I like could not catch my breath. And I I called my friend. I was like, "Can you please come over here?" And then I called my house counselor, and I was like, "Miss Thompson, can I please bring a friend into the dorm?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, it's fine." And I ended up closing the door. And I just cried with my friend for a while. Thanks, Viva. But I think that is like obviously a very extreme reaction to something that was happening in my life. And like, if the door had been open, I would have gotten no privacy. And I'm curious, like, if even just like I want to hang out with a friend and like just decompress, how can we do that in a situation like mine where the door is just like welcome into my life, you know?
Yeah, there's really no way that the door can be open and you're not like you're not sitting on the doorstep. But
I have a rectangular room, so if the door is at one side, one of the legs, the other leg is the end of the room.
gotcha.
Yeah.
That's a tricky one. And so we're assuming there are people in the common room.
Yes, and or just like walking back
Yeah.
and forth, which we've had as well.
I think that's a good conversation to have with house counselors because, again, like every dorm is different. There are some rooms that are really off the beaten path. And there's some that it sounds like yours where it's really on the beaten path.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's worth talking through, like where are the places where you could meet with somebody and problem solve it with the adults in your life.
I see. Arim, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, just looking at what we kind of wanted to ask you, Dean Esty, we were also wondering, I think you talked about this in terms of just campus safety and also dorm community bonding, but do you think there are any other reasons that kind of necessitate the room visitation policies that we have right now, whether that be in terms of like relationships, romantically or just like between friends, like with Tina and her friend? Yeah, so just like what do you think, what is the purpose of them and why are they important?
Yeah. So, I mean, part of it is just the law too. And so in an intentionally diverse community,
Yeah.
where we're trying to be respectful of all the different families and cultures and experiences that they bring, it's really hard with minors. So you will see this when you go to college. It's completely different. But because you all are still the responsibility of either your parents or us, or while you're here boarding, both, or actually while you're here as a day student, both, right? If you're on our campus, you're our responsibility. We have to set up our limits and guardrails so that it supports everybody following the law. Whether or not everybody follows the law, we have to set up structures that would lead to students following the law, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for example, there can be no penetration of any orifice by any body part until you're 16 years of age in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so it may be that some parents are like, at 16, you're good to go. Come on over, invite your friends. And there are other parents who are like, we are going to have conversations and you are going to go through confirmation and you're going to do like X, Y, and Z. And there are steps that we're going to take. And families have their own values. And so it's really our job to respect different families and students' values and the laws. So that's why some of it is actually set up just so that we're in compliance with those expectations, because the laws are in place to keep kids safe. And if we're not keeping you safe, then we're really not doing our job.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. something that I'm particularly curious about is sort of to your point about balancing different cultures. I also wonder, like, for, like, I think, say, I'm a student who's, less open to someone coming into my room or anything like that. I think this system works perfectly. But for a student who's more open, more, whether that be sexually or even just like in terms of privacy, feeling like, oh, I want all my friends to come and, be in my room with me. How do you think a student who's more inclined to have that kind of social or sexual interaction once they turn 16, how can they have that as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I just don't want to, I want to respect parents and the role that parents play in young people's lives. And so it's really important that we, in the same way that we say some people want their home space to be really serene and quiet, and that helps them think and helps them sleep. And some people want their home space to be really social and loud and fun. And we have to overall, like, for example, we know that 7 to 8 hours to 9 hours ideally of sleep would be ideal for people your age. You need less as you get older, but you need a good 7. Because we know those things, it would be really irresponsible of us to set up a structure in which people could be loud after 11 p.m. Just knowing, even if we said, and even if parents said, oh, Tina never goes to bed before 3 a.m. when Tina's home, right? Like, that's fine for you at your home, but like, we can't set up a dorm community where you could be loud at 3 a.m. because the health and safety piece is actually you need your sleep to be healthy and safe, literally. So that's just part of, I think, living in community. And it's a hard one, right? Like, we give up something to live in society. We have to make some concessions to live in community with others. And I think that's true no matter your age.
Yeah.
There are like condo rules and stuff, right? Like, this is just part of life. For you, it's a little more just because of the laws around sexual activity for minors. It's more restrictive even for people your age, but there are always going to be those kinds of situations.
Yeah.
I think something that I wanted to bring up was because I'm a part of Yes Plus, and we've also been in conversations about or surrounding room visitations. Part of what people touch on is the fact that despite these rules, like you also said, people do a lot of illegal, like quote unquote illegal room visits, right? And so, and I have like, seen these happen, and I remember like I hear all the time about like my friends doing them or like knowing people who do them. And so I think I've caught from your response, part of it is that you still need to do what you can, even if students don't necessarily comply with it. Like, just to comply with the law, like that is your responsibility as the school. But then in terms when we're speaking about the efficacy of these measures, like what are some ways that you think they could be improved, or, like what do you think is a reason that students just aren't or are still holding a lot of illegal room visits? Yeah.
Why do I think students are? So
Well,
I was going to say, so the
that's one
speed
question.
limit is mostly like 55 in this country, and it's set up for health and safety reasons. And we know that not everybody drives 55. It still doesn't mean we shouldn't have a speed limit. And it also does mean that I think it conveys a valuing of health and safety. And so I think that's a really important piece. And the other piece, again, is that most of you, I know some of you are, most of you are not 18. And so you're actually not free of parental guidance yet. And so there's this tricky piece for us that colleges don't have to navigate, which is that we are partners with your parents in encouraging you all to wait to drink and wait to have sexual encounters, particularly sexual encounters while you're drinking, like all the things that could go sideways, right? And the reality is we'd like to think that it's all fine. The college data does not support that. I wish it were different, but it just doesn't. And so we have to have some limits in place to try to keep you all healthy and safe. Like, sadly, I know that's hard. And I know, like, everybody resists limits. Trust me. I do. Like, sometimes I don't want to drive 55, but like those things, I think society, and in particular school as an institution of society, like, we have to do our part to keep young people safe. And it may be that most of you are safe, but for the few people who feel like, otherwise, I might feel pressured to be alone in a space with someone and to feel like I need to participate in something I don't want to participate in, is that's a lot for somebody 15 to like navigate. And I think we can probably, I see you nodding. I think we agree that that's a lot for somebody to navigate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do wonder with students who are somewhat determined to have sexual encounters, a lot of them are ending up in really unsafe places, whether that be, outdoors with germs and whatnot, or just like in public spaces where, they are really putting a lot of people who might be, just inhabiting those public spaces in very uncomfortable positions. It's like, what would you say to those students who are going to have sex, and the question is, like, how can they do it so as to not disrupt the community?
Get an overnight excuse and go to your house. You could take your partner home.
What if you live really far away? International students.
It's hard. For international students, host family, maybe?
Oh, God.
I don't think
That's crazy. Oh, my God. Oh, no.
that's what they're for.
That's crazy.
You said that, not me. That's what they're there for.
That was the question.
Yeah.
So you would say, like, off campus?
Well, I don't think, right? We cannot legally bless underage sexual activity. We just cannot. In fact, we're mandated reporters.
16.
And then over 16, again, it becomes where we're like partnered with your parents. So yeah, I don't know what that would look like, right? And I think that's a great conversation. If you all really want to push for closed door room visits, I really think you should get your parents on board. Because I think that would be like a more, again, we're an intentionally diverse community. Like, we are trying to create a space where all are welcome. And sometimes that does mean that we have to give up some opportunities that we would like to have. And I know that's hard, but right?
So because there's been talk about reforming these policies, right? So
Among whom?
among, like, for example, I know that was a pretty big part of like Sui and Nigel's like platform, and I know they're leaving now, right? But
I think also it's just like on campus conversation, there's a lot about like, oh, I really don't like the current system, or like, oh, I think the system should be more X, Y, or Z. I'm curious, like, what your advice would be for students who are planning on pushing for it or who want to push for it, and like, what direction do you think they can work with the administration rather than sort of push at meaningless rocks?
I think so that's a great question. I love that question. I mean, I think student council is a good structure to use as a voice for students. And I think there would need to be some willingness to propose something we could actually do.
so instead of just being like, oh, like we don't like this, actually having concrete stuff that we would like to pursue instead.
Yeah, and be willing to flex, right? So like, because I can't imagine, every time I feel like I have an idea, I have to test it out with a lot of different people because we have so many different perspectives and experiences here on campus that I would never, ever, just because I really, so I'll give you an example. I love peanut butter. I do.
Me too.
I think it's fantastic.
Me
I like
too.
it on vegetables. I like it on yogurt. I like it on fruit, on apples, like you name it. But I could never push for peanut butter on this campus because for some people it's a life-threatening allergy, right? So that's a smaller thing than sexual activity, but I do say that to say, like, I just understand. So like, if I were trying to push for peanut butter at a big event, like, how would I work with people to figure out, like, so what are the possibilities? Like, what could we do? And maybe I would understand after a while, like, okay, I get it. I can't do that. But I think there are ways to think about, like, what could be, what can flex, what can give. Like, I don't know what the answer is, but I think if students had a concrete ask and then researched it and said, what would it mean to my dorm community if we changed room visits in this way? And what would it mean to my dorm team, right? The adults who work with us, and what would it mean to our parents, and what would it mean to administration, and like get all the perspectives and try to figure out how we could shift it. I'm not saying, like, it is not written in stone. You all know that. Like, we have to respond to different student needs at different times and different societal pressures at different times. So I think there's a lot of room to explore. And the key is just to, like, include as many voices as we can and perspectives as we can.
Yeah, that sounds great. Anything? All right. Well, Esty, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. Do you have any final thoughts or maybe just anything you would like students to hear?
No, I love that you all are asking questions. Like, I think that's a great approach. I think sometimes we've gotten to a place in our country, right, where, I don't know, I feel like we just fight issues out instead of asking, where can we meet each other? Like, we've become a country of extremes. So I really appreciate your approach that, like, sort of, why is it this way and how could it change? And my question is, if it changes, what does that look like for all the different people who are impacted? And then, like, let's talk. Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you for coming and thank you for joining us. And that's it for today.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Yay.